Welcome back from the break. I'm Khalil Charles. Now we'll look at the online news, and we have in the studio with us Davide. Great to have you back. Could you start off by letting us know what we've got in store for us? What's the first article?
The first article is about Tanzania. Now teachers will have free rights to school. This is a new policy that the government of President Magufuli is trying to implement. For now, it's just for a few selected schools, but hopefully soon all the teachers in the country will be allowed to go for free from their home to their local schools.
That sounds great. He's going for a big popular drive, isn't he? Because
yes.
I do remember that when he was elected, he made a pledge that he'll try and to deal with corruption. And also the ministers' cars, he actually he took them away from them. They said they weren't able to have cars. So it looks like he's giving the transport from the ministers to the children.
To the children.
I think that'll be quite a popular move.
It's very good. It's very good. The First Lady visited some schools in Tanzania, and she realized how the problems, are big, and the infrastructures are, the maintenance, the level of maintenance is quite bad. And teachers pointed out this issue of transporting children and teachers from home to schools. So it would be a great thing to have in Tanzania.
That's excellent, and of course, education is so much important for that region.
Absolutely.
And I do know that there's quite a large amount of private and state schools that run side by side.
Absolutely.
So this will be a way of giving everybody opportunity to get to their classes. That's great. Okay, what have we got next?
The second article is about the Central African Republic. Unfortunately, after the elections, new violence have erupted between the Seleka and the anti-Balaka. So the civil war continues, although the electoral process was largely pacific and quiet and went quite smoothly. The second round of elections was the 14th of February this year, and a new president was elected, a former prime minister and math teacher. Now, however, 12 people have died, and this is the first such act of violence after the elections.
Are we expecting things to get worse, Davide? I mean,
things might get worse. Now, we also know that, UN peacekeepers have allegedly raped children and women in the country, so the situation is expected. In terms of the politics, things might go better, but still there is a tension, and the civil war is ongoing. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's move away from some bad news and give us some good news, David.
The good news goes with the third article. I like bringing articles about art and entertainment. So we have a third article. A new documentary called Lost Tongue is going to be played in the New York Film Festival. It's a documentary about this lost tongue in South Africa, and this journalist goes to the last few speakers of this language, and she interviews them, and she tries, to bring back this issue on top of the agenda, saying we have to reward diversity, we have to be happy of the diversity of how diverse the world is.
So there's a danger of losing this tongue.
Yes.
It actually reminds me of the situation in Cuba, where the language there was unknown in a sense, and one of the things they try to do is to cross-cultural, to try and check the language that was in a different part of the country or part of the world.
Yeah.
And I understand that they found that this language, which was very strange and was losing the amount of people that were speaking it, but actually they found it was linked to Sierra Leone.
All right.
And so people there were able to say, well, yeah, that's our language. They're actually speaking the language that we have.
Absolutely.
And so rather than being a language that was going to die out, it actually was a language that was present in another part of the world.
Right.
So maybe in this instance, where from South Africa, maybe there's somewhere on the rest part of the continent where that could take place. It's a documentary in documentary form, but I think what's going to be the outcome of that documentary? Do you think that this language will eventually die out?
Well, hopefully it won't. Hopefully it won't. Hopefully it will happen exactly like in Cuba and somewhere else in the world, and find out that they speak this language. It could happen. Who knows? At least we hope that this documentary will have a good critical success in the New York Film Festival. That's a big thing.
Yes, indeed. It's not the one, like the one in Scotland. I understand there was a language that was lost in the Highlands, and the last person died last year. There wasn't, and so that language disappeared with that. Absolutely. Okay, and your last story for us.
My last story. Now we go to Ivory Coast, and it's a Reuters feature about the role of women in the country.
International Women's Day.
It's been International Women's Day, so what best occasion to bring this story back to life? We know that women in the Ivory Coast are starting to gain, importance in society, in politics. We know that the finance minister of Ivory Coast, she's a woman, and she's the first woman ever to be appointed to such a high level office. We know that in Parliament and in the cabinet, the number of Ivory Coast, number of women is increasing, is becoming more and more, and also the group that controls the cocoa industry in the country is chaired by a woman, and a woman has been appointed to such a big and important role.
That's good. That's also positive things really happening in that country. I understand after Alexander Ouattara was re-elected, then he also had his eyes on getting a cabinet places. Right. I think he's got about 10, 11 women in the cabinet there, which is great, because I think in general across Africa the women's position tends to be not as strong as it should be, shall we say, in terms of the walks of life. So that's a push that needs to happen. Absolutely. And of course, International Women's Day kind of emphasises the need for the position of women to be reinforced, and for the opportunities that are given to everybody are given to them and them as well.
Still a lot needs to be done, however, in Ivory Coast, because, for instance, in the military there are just 26 female soldiers, but one of them is a general, so still there are ups and downs, positives and negatives in the in the country.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Davide, for doing that. Thank you. Bye-bye. Now, Africa's top scientists, policy makers and startups gathered at a landmark conference aimed at stemming continent brain drain and encouraging governments to nurture research in fields from virology, which is the study of viruses, to maths. Senegal could be one of the countries leading the way. Adam Amuno has more.
Africa's top scientists, policymakers and startups gathered on Tuesday for a landmark conference aimed at stemming the continent's brain drain and encouraging governments to nurture research in fields from virology to maths. The first Next Einstein Forum, or NEF, was held near Senegal's capital, Dakar, with the aims to reverse a situation in which Africa's brightest talent feel compelled to move abroad to work at the cutting edge of research and earn a decent salary.
De faire prendre conscience déjà aux Africains et aux gens de l'extérieur qu'il y a un grand potentiel scientifique en Afrique. En passant déjà par des sciences fondamentales comme les mathématiques, la physique, etc. Mais on a toute une génération de nouveaux chercheurs avec plein d'idées qu'on cherche à développer.
The timing is insightful. The inspiration behind this conference, a recent Ebola panel during a top US science conference where not a single African researcher or medic was present, who had worked in West Africa during the 18-month outbreak. According to Thierry Zumahun, the CEO of the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, there are more African engineers working in the United States than in Africa. The NEF's creation of a fellowship program for Africa's top young scientists will be followed by the establishment of an African Union-linked Science and Technology Institute, while a pan-African team of NEF ambassadors will engage their respective publics at home.
Je suis rentré au Sénégal depuis 2013. Et donc, quelque chose qui est très intéressant, c'est qu'en fait, de 2013 jusqu'à là où je vous parle, mes publications en mathématiques et dans des revues internationaux ont doublé. Donc moi je suis très bien en Afrique et je crois que nous devons tous savoir que l'environnement aussi où nous voulons réussir, c'est à nous de le créer.
Rwandan President Paul Kagame, who attended the conference, said that Africa suffered from too few students involved in science-related tertiary education, a lack of investment and little collaboration between governments and the private sector. In light of International Women's Day, he also cited the lack of African women in science.
En Afrique, il y a l'avantage d'avoir encore une vision qui est extrêmement large et où on ne se bat pas sur des terrains. On a vraiment une vision que la science peut permettre et que les collaborations scientifiques peuvent permettre l'avancement.
At the core of this gathering is how shared and sustainable prosperity can come about through science and innovation. The pressure is on to catch up and keep pace, so Africa is not left in the wake of technological progress.
Now, joining us to discuss this is Amanda Weltman, who's a fellow of the Next Einstein Forum. She's also a senior lecturer in the Department of Mathematics and Applied Mathematics at the University of Cape Town. In the last few years, she has won several awards, including the National Women in Science Award for the Best Emerging Young Researcher in Natural Sciences and Engineering in the year 2009. Thanks very much indeed, Amanda, for joining us on the programme. We've been hearing that the conference has gone very well, and we'll talk about that in a second. But, of course, the conference is trying to address this question of the brain drain. Could you tell us, brain drain is nothing new for Africa, but what is the extent of the brain drain and how damaging is that for the African continent?
So first, I'm going to slightly correct you. I'm an associate professor at the University of Cape Town.
Okay.
And it's relatively relevant to your question because I'm also a South African research chair. And that is one of the mechanisms that the National Research Foundation of South Africa has been using to retain South Africans and to help reverse the brain drain and really gain South African talent back into the country. So, you know, to your question, the issue of all of our best talent pool leaving the country, of course, that's a major problem, or leaving the continent, in fact. It's a major problem. You know, we train people, they get a number of fantastic skills that could be used to utilize within their own economies and return the education within their economies. And unfortunately, if the opportunities are not available in Africa, then they will leave.
Yes, I wanted to talk to you about that. Yes, sorry,
yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead, because
I was going to say, on the other hand,
yes.
The upside is that I'm seeing more and more in the last decade that there's a whole generation of African scientists that are going overseas, training, qualifying, and then coming back. And in some sense, you know, someone who stays in Africa has a contact and a community within Africa, but there's also a certain value to going overseas, building a strong network and bringing back that connectivity for our own communities. So reversing the brain drain in some sense is almost better than having never had it. You know, allowing for this free flow of ideas through Africa, through Europe, through the USA, Australia, and through back to Africa is really very positive.
I see. I mean, because I was actually interested also in terms of what can be done by the African countries themselves. Because, like you said, the opportunities that are available, this tends to be the problem. Because anybody who's going to find an opportunity back in their own country would I assume, prefer to come back. But there seems to be a problem with those opportunities and seems to be a problem with the will of African governments to actually invest in their citizens. Would you agree with that?
I think partially the situation is government related, so there isn't sufficient funding that is set aside for science and for higher education, but it's not such a direct thing because the government cannot directly hire scientists, and it's not entirely their job to create employment in that sector, but it filters down. So if they fund their departments of science and technology and education well, then their national funding bodies are funded well, and that trickles down to the universities who then also fund. So there's a level in which the government investment needs to go through, but also the universities need to appreciate local talent and sometimes be willing to take a risk on new ideas that will, you know, perhaps innovate and take the country and the continent to another level.
But we are seeing in some instances where the call for 1% of GDP to be put into research just simply isn't matched. And I think the African Union is saying it's not the problem of funding, it's actually the problem of the will and the determination of the governments to do that. Would you agree?
The two are coupled. So the 1%, I think there's only one country, I think Tanzania is the only country in Africa that's reaching that target. No other country is, not even South Africa. So that is absolutely crucial, but the two are coupled. If you have the will to do something, but you're not willing to invest financially or with time and energy, it doesn't happen. You know, so really the will from the government needs to be coupled to actual financial investment and commitment. Because it does feed back, though. You know, the stuff that scientists do eventually feeds back into the economy, sometimes very quickly, could transform the way that the continent interacts with itself and with the rest of the world. But political will and money are really the same thing.
What about the actual specific case of South Africa? Because I think we're talking about a latest report saying that 359,000 South Africans have actually returned to South Africa to get involved back into sciences and those kind of fields. Is that actually helpful? I assume it would be, but is that helpful to for the country and the aim of reducing the brain drain?
Absolutely, it's enormously helpful. When you have people who've left and come back, it tells you the extent to which South Africa is home, the extent to which they love being there, and how willing they are to commit to the country. It's a very strong statement to leave and then come back. And, you know, that, as I said earlier, when you spend time somewhere else, you learn about how other people think, how other people argue, debate, the skills that you get there and the context that you get there really can go very, very far back home. So I had not heard that number before, but I'm not surprised. So many South Africans are coming home, and that's really a wonderful thing. The crucial thing is that we need to continuously create a home for them to come back to, and that's, you know, part of our work now as this generation of scientists.
In terms of the targets that are being set, Africa, you say that because there's less than 1% that's been happening. Is there any move to increase the targets? How is that viable to actually get those targets met?
I think that's a question of political will, and it's a very difficult thing because there are really a large number of forces pushing on the government for various demands. And so right now in South Africa, there's a huge push towards free higher education. And so we need to invest in education, early child education, and higher education, university education for poor students really should be free or affordable. And so, you know, getting that investment in science as well, there's a lot of competition there, but they're interacting. You know, if you're training a student, in some sense, many of them land up studying science or within these areas. So there is a sort of push there. Another driving force is big projects. So like the Square Kilometre Array project, which is co-hosted by Africa. You may have heard about it. It's thousands of telescopes with a total collecting area of a square kilometre will be spread around Africa and will be able to tell us about the sky. We'll see the sky in unprecedented detail. That will build up engineering, technology, data sciences, computer sciences, mathematics, statistics, physics, astronomy. Huge amount of industry will grow out of that. Tourism, it'll be it's an interacting system. So the investment in these big projects trickles into all different kinds of sectors, but you have to somehow capture the imagination of one of the politicians or someone in government to say, wow, this is a big project, we should do this.
Indeed. You know? So capturing the imagination of the politician is also meaning capturing the imagination of the student, I guess. And I think going back, if you like, to the higher education side of things and giving that technical leapfrog to students, how helpful will it be for that concentration of the younger student to concentrate on the younger student in order that might be helpful later on? Would that be fruitful?
I'm not sure what the question is. So the technological leapfrogging is certainly happening. So, and I'm hoping that it happens even faster. Figuring out better networks across Africa so that we are less dependent on any one country for the way that we communicate is very important. For the students, you know, we're technologically relatively advanced in South Africa. We are advanced in South Africa. And our students are phenomenal. They will take you down on technological stuff. So, you know, I think that in that sense we're very good, but getting everything across Africa and connecting in a sort of robust way where there's no sensitivity of just one or two nodes in the network is crucial.
Let's turn now to the conference that you've been attending, and I understand it's gone very well. What are the key points of that conference, and what has it done in terms of closing the gap of the brain drain?
So I think, for me personally, the most valuable part of the conference has been meeting the other fellows. So there were 15 Einstein fellows that were chosen from around the African continent. They're all African citizens. Some are living abroad, studying or training abroad or working abroad. And bringing them all together to learn about each other, to learn about our countries and our science and our obstacles, and figuring out how we can resource share and build a strong African community to then sort of support the next several generations in building up science across Africa, for me, that has been the most valuable. There have also been a really large number of people for us to network with and interact with, and I think there's been a lot of, that's been very valuable for many. We've had a lot of industry coming in and seeing, oh, actually, we have some amazing scientists who can do this. They may be able to help me with that. And so that industry connection's been very valuable. And then on a sort of high level, there's been enormously positive political will. So there were several ministers of science from around Africa. We had Macky Sall and Paul Kagame. So we had, you know, the president of Senegal and the president of Rwanda. The next meeting will be in 2 years in Kigali in Rwanda. So we had that sort of passing of the baton, which is really fantastic. And I think it's done an enormous amount to bring to the world's attention, this is Africa. And yes, we do fantastic science here. We have phenomenal cutting-edge scientists who are going to cure TB and who will figure out new technologies to improve public health and who will discover and uncover the secrets of the universe. So I think that, you know, on some level, the importance has been just to bring people together, connect us, get us talking, build that community, and maybe wake up the world's eyes to the fact that Africa as a continent is going to be a force to be reckoned with in the coming years.
You mentioned there that there were some people from the African diaspora that they were living outside of Africa. Do you think with this program, with this joining of ideas, a joining of heads, do you think it's more likely that they will want to come back to Africa and do more work and bridge that gap?
Yes. So there's two questions: will they want to, and will they be able to? I think they all want to. I think that's already a given, and one of them is currently moving back to Senegal. I think whether they will be able to is really up to how well we succeed in our objectives. So one of Neil Turok's objectives for the coming years with AIMS and the whole AIMS Next Einstein initiative is to have 100 new research chairs across Africa, and I think produce 1,000 PhD students. And if I know anything about Neil, he will succeed. So I think that is really our challenge. How do we support each other to get good positions back in Africa? How do we support each other and build networks to convince, you know, external funding bodies and our national governments that this is a good way to go? Research chairs are a phenomenal investment. They're relatively cheap, and they build an enormous amount of human capital. You're investing in people, and then those people invest in ideas and other people. So I think they may be the single most important instrument in bringing people back to Africa and in building capacity.
That sounds really exciting, and I hope that you keep in touch with us so we keep finding out more about how the connection between the scientists are developing. Thanks very much indeed for coming on the program.
Great.
Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the program, but I'd like to thank all my guests for joining the show and for you at home for watching. Now, as the country marks its 10th anniversary of the death of one of Africa's most renowned musicians, we leave you with scenes from Mali, who this week paid tribute to the genius of Ali Farka Touré by naming a square in the capital after him. Good night.